Good morning. With the permission of Honorable the Chief Justice, High Court of Sikkim, I, on behalf of Sikkim Judicial Academy, would like to begin today's awareness program on Mental Health Care Act 2017. To conduct this session, we have Dr. Satyajit as Consulting Psychiatrist, Kolkata, West Bengal. May I now request Learning Director to kindly welcome Learning Resource Person by offering khada and bouquet. Thank you so much, sir. I'd like to request Learning Director to kindly say a few words before we begin the session.
Good morning to everyone present here. It is an honor and a great privilege to have the benign presence of Hon'ble the Chief Justice High Court of Sikkim and Patron Chief of Sikkim Judicial Academy, who despite of having heavy pressure of engagement busy schedule has been kind enough to come all the way from Hon'ble High Court of Sikkim and come here to bless these very important sessions organized for officers and staff of Registry High Court of Sikkim as well as Sikkim Judicial Academy. In this connection, I, on behalf of Sikkim Judicial Academy, would like to extend a warm welcome to His Lordship, and definitely Lordship presence and blessings will boost the moral of all participants present here. And I once again welcome your Lordship. I really would like to welcome the knowledge resource person of today's program who have come all the way from Calcutta, keeping aside of all personal comfort and convenience, come here duly accepting the request of Sikkim Judicial Academy to do the honor of conducting today's very important session of our program. I also welcome you, sir, and grateful for being here to do the honor of conducting today's session. I welcome the Learned Registrar General, High Court of Sikkim, Learned Registrar Judicial Service, Additional Registrar PPS to Hon'ble the Chief Justice, Joint Registrar IT, all officers and staff members of Hon'ble High Court of Sikkim and Sikkim Judicial Academy. I would like to welcome you all. Today, we are gathered here to have brainstorming discussion on very important topics. And I request all participants to kindly come forward and try to bring more zeal and enthusiastic discussion on topics of today's program. Now, to say on this particular topic, very great, big questions now stands before us. That is whether we are really suffering from mental illness. Obviously, the layman answer is no. That particular answer is without having any support of psychological and clinical report or specialist report. So there is a stigma in our society saying that the moment we disclose any mental illness by anybody in this society, then that is a great stigma. But after now implementation of Mental Health Care Act, Section 23 has now properly preserved to maintain this confidentiality. So now, when I was there in 2017, while going through the record of mental illness, during that time, 197.3 million people of the country suffered from mental disorder, out of which 95.7 million population of the country suffer from depression. and 44.9% population suffer from anxiety. And this break of this total mental disorder on daily basis, when we calculated that depression disorder 33.8%, anxiety disorder 19%, idiopathic development intellectual disorder 10.1%, schizophrenia 9.8%, bipolar disorder 6.9%, conduct disorders 5.9%, autism spectrum disorder 3.2%, eating disorder 2.2%, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder 0.3%. This morning I went through the record and see what is the report of NIMANS. NIMANS says 150 population of our country suffering from mental illness, out of which only 33% of populations are taking care of mental illness, meaning thereby huge figure of populations are still suffering from mental illness and not disclosed to the competent authority or psychologists, psychiatrists. So therefore, we have to sensitize our officers and staff members of Registry of Hon'ble High Court and Sikkim Judicial Academy, and it is the brainchild of our Honorable the Chief Justice, who always take care of our not only administrative matters, but mental, emotional, and other issues as a mentor, as a guide, guardians. And due to the blessing of Honorable Chief Justice, the Sikkim Judicial Academy is able to organize the program of this magnitude. And I once again, on behalf of Sikkim Judicial Academy, would like to offer sincere gratitude to Honorable Chief Justice for this having this wonderful session led to the resource person of that particular quality from Kolkata, which I never dreamed of before, to have such a resource person. Once again, I, on behalf of Honorable High Court of Sikkim, to our extend a warm welcome to resource person led to on behalf of Sikkim Judicial Academy also. And with these words now, I would like to request the learned resource person to kindly begin today's session. Thank you. Introduce Dr. Chunki Lecha, Coordinator Language Section HRTT Department, Government of Sikkim, and Mr. Vishnu Neopane, Senior Correspondent, All India Radio, are present here to do the honor of translating whatever deliberation the learned resource person is going to make for easy understanding of our all participants present here. So I request to kindly learned resource person to kindly begin this session. Yes.
Right. So, can you start? Thank you, Mr. Sherpa, Director, Judicial Academy. Good morning to you all. To begin with, Chief Justice, Honorable Chief Justice, and dignitaries, and all staff members of Judicial Academy and High Court. I feel privileged and honored to begin with, but today we have come to interact basically related to something, very important issues in our life, mental health related problems. Though the topic is on awareness program on Mental Health Care Act 2017, but as I understand that understanding about mental health and illness itself is not so much widespread, and the depth of knowledge obviously is not expected, but generally the spread of knowledge related to mental health, the basic awareness related to mental health and illness, the studies reveal that is very much poor across the society. So I'll be expecting that it's no different in this place as well. And so to make this our, whatever time we have for discussion, to make it more meaningful, with the suggestions from our Honorable Chief Justice, I would like it to be more interactive. So I'd like it to be more interactive to begin with. Maybe a few things before we start interacting. I have a prepared slides for what I wanted to talk about, but I also understand that it could be a boring session if I talk unilaterally, one directionally. It will be more of a didactic kind of a session. But instead, if we could interact, I would talk about a few definitions while I talk about a little bit of history of Mental Health Care Act to make the session a little more relevant. But you can go back and forth whichever direction you lead me to, and I'll be happy to do that. If we get more interest in mental health care problems, and related stuff rather than limiting ourselves to acts only, the Mental Health Care Act. So with this idea, I start my presentation, but I would request you to be, feel free enough to stop me and ask any question related to our topic. The topic is not limited to Mental Health Care Act, again I say. It can be anything related to mental health care and problem. So with these few words, let me have the topic. So we have justice. Is that yeah? Together. Right. So I plan to cover the topic on the history part, which I'll do, and understanding the basic few concepts. The mental illness is not just illness of mind; it has got some more theoretical underpinnings. What we call mental illness. It's not that somebody this fellow is seemingly having some kind of problem in the mind. That's not about mental illness. Mental illness got a very specific definition and understanding, and it has got inclusion criteria, which means that to have mental illness, you have to have fulfill certain criteria. And so we'll do that. Mental retardation is about a term that we'll talk about, disability and unsoundness mind. Quite a few words have been obsolete these days. We'll talk about that. And new terms have replaced not only the terms, but the whole concept has changed. So the terms also have changed. We'll talk about, supposed to talk about determinants of mental illness, capacity of a person to make decisions about his healthcare decisions. In mental health establishments, people when they are very kind of unmanageable situations, either family cannot manage them, or they become too much disturbed to take care of themselves, could possibly be harmful. So there will be some indications of placing them into a mental health establishment or treatment center. So we'll talk about that. And then we'll talk about the more important part of this Mental Health Care Act, advanced directives, duties of nominative representatives, rights of person with mental illness. So these are the topics that I wanted to cover, but as I said, I do not want to limit myself talking about this only, and during my conversations, I would like you to chip in with your own comments, experience, and maybe a few questions that you have. So I'll do a bit of, we'll trace back the history. Today's Mental Health Care Act 2017, it didn't really arrive suddenly, and it has had its own evolutionary part. What perhaps prompted this 2017 Mental Health Care Act is a follow suit of this UNCRPD, United Nations Convention on Rights of Persons with Disability, in October 2017. We had this Mental Health Act. Today it is Mental Health Care Act. care term is added, and is very significantly added. So Mental Health Act 1987 did not focus much on the rights of the people, that was the deficient. Whether it was necessary, because the UNCRPD focused heavily focused on the human rights of the mentally ill person, and which 1987 Mental Health Act was not really addressing at all, almost. So we had to follow suit, we have to really align our 1987 Act to the UNCRPD 2007, and then a new act. It was so much of difference had to make, the new act had to be kept in place. So new law was made, a new act was in place, and that's how our new Mental Health Care Act arrived. So as far as our Indian scenario is concerned, Indian scenario is concerned, so we had 3 domestic laws. Indian Lunacy Act 1912, obviously it was in pre-independence era. The whole idea of the way we used to talk about mental health issues is that madness, unsoundness of mind. So the mad people. And the society has to be, the mad people are dangerous people. That was the perception. So the society has to be kept safe from the attack of these mad people. That was the idea. So what do? You throw them out of the general boundary of society, put them aside the margin of the society. So this act was basically to be seen as a marginalization of mentally unhealthy people, considered as unsafe people, deadly people, attacking people. So you segregate them, you separate them from the mainstream of society, and you put them into a kind of place which we call is asylum, right? So you can think of, I am a student of Central Institute of Psychiatry, Ranchi, and if you ever visit that place, you'll be seeing that the huge wall separating from it's away from the civil world, almost 15-20 kilometers away from the center of the city, almost barren land. Even 35 years ago when I was a student of that place, completely barren. Very minimal communication was there. And if you look at the structure, the huge wall, and then the sanatorium, the iron rods keeping aside inside, tightening the persons with holding them in tight, people, so on and so forth. So basically, that was the idea. But later on, in 1987, the focus shifted, because that with the advent of new medications during the late 50s, 1960s, we started having some medication which could address the psychiatric problems. Scientific development also have taken place, that from the disease concept of mental illness actually started arriving. So now we know that that everything that is psychological is actually the functions of the brain cells at a very fine molecular level. So if you look at a brain cell and then go down inside, there will be nucleus and there will be genes, and there will be fine molecules called genetic molecules. So during these interactions with the environment, some changes are always taking place, and all mental phenomena. If we look at a rose and see how beautiful it is, actually it is biological origin. So the sensory inputs through visual inputs is going to the brain, there is an appreciation center, and the language comes out from my mouth, oh so beautiful. So this whole kind of appreciation is essentially biological in nature. That's my point. So mental illness is likewise an expression of some dysfunctions of brain cells at a very fine molecular level. Why I say fine molecular level? Because in today's scientific, with all advancement, we don't know exactly the nature of these molecular changes, But with the advent of functional MRI, with the advent of PET scan and different kind of technological development, gradually we are inching towards find out what exactly is happening inside the cell to say that this is the specific biological changes with a certain kind of experience that we are having. So all normal functions of the mind are functions of the brain cells. So that is precise the idea, today's idea. And so medicine started, obviously medicine started working, and the medicine came out almost serendipitously that accidentally there were some medicines were discovered and it helped a few psychotic patients, which we call the so-called mad or insane people. And with that gradual improvement in the mental state, so focus was shifted from segregating the mentally ill person from the society. Some effort were tried to be keeping them inside the society and treating them. And so the Mental Health Act was geared towards treatment of these mentally ill persons. So institutional care still the mainstay, but drug treatment came in, and rights of person with mental illness were still again. There's no concept of rights because still their hands were tied, legs were tied, put in the inside the rods, and so on and so forth. So that was about Mental Health Act 1987. So with the advent of some India became a signatory, as we now know, 2007. So now the pressure is on, because Indian government now could not absolve itself of the basic duty of aligning the new mental health law, which will take care of the rights of the mentally ill person as well. So new law was enacted, and now rights, autonomy and agency of persons with mental illness, they became at the center of legislation. That's a huge leap from separation-based approach to right-based of the mental ill person. So focus from saving the society to acknowledging the person's own needs and autonomy and agency and rights. There's a huge shift, and that actually what defines our new act. So it's definitely a new development. And so within this rights framework, which is actually the 2017 Mental Health Care Act is all about. So now we proceed on to that. A few timeline is there. A presidential assent was done, President signed on the bill to make it act on April 2017, and then it became operational under government notification in 2018. Okay, so essentially, these are all the timeline that we have. It's not much important, just for those who are interested in history, that is the part. But the more important part is what Mental Health Care Act is all about is mentioned in in the preamble of Mental Health Care Act. There are two important objectives, and these two important objectives, I request all of you to have a close look at this.
मानसिक स्वास्थ्य हेरचाह ऐनमाथि जुन विचार आदान प्रदान भइरहेछ, यसमा चाहिँ दुईवटा प्रमुख विषयहरूमाथि आज अलि चर्चा गर्नुहुनेछ र ती दुई प्रमुख विषयहरूमा उहाँले अगाडि बढाउनुहुनेछ, अगाडि बताउनुहुनेछ।
Before that, I would request, how many of you probably will find it difficult if spoken only in English? How many of you will find it? Please, I just request you to understand that we have some help out there. So, but before that, I was thinking that those who are not being really follow me, I would request you please give me some idea, how many of you are finding it difficult to follow me?
We will leave the introduction session in Nepal. You can carry on with your
Okay. But feel, okay, right. So thank you. That is. So please go ahead. You have done? This portion is done? So it's all right. So mental health care for all. That's the first point. Everybody. Across the board. No gender basis. No class basis. No economic discrimination. Everybody. All the children, all the old aged people, no differences. So that is provision of mental health. It's the duty of the government, appropriate government, to take care of the mental health needs of all people at a very state level, central level, etc. Protection, promotion and fulfillment of rights of such persons during delivery of health care. It's really a right-based approach. Previously, we used to know, especially in judiciary, unsoundness of mind was very favorable toward, and it used to be very frequently used in 1987 Mental Health Act. So, unsoundness of mind is an obsolete term. It's something to, in today's perhaps the more equivalent term will be the psychosis, which necessarily means a person is not in touch with the real world. We'll explain it later. For the moment, let's say what mental illness is all about. Mental illness means a substantial disorder of thinking, mood, perception, orientation, memory that grossly impairs judgment, behavior, capacity to recognize reality, or ability to meet the ordinary demands of life. Mental conditions associated with the abuse of alcohol and drugs, but does not include mental retardation, which is a condition of arrested or incomplete development. So it defines what mental illness is and what is not. It excludes mental retardation. So basically what it intends to say, a little bit of clarification perhaps will be helpful. Now if you think of mind, so what is the function of mind? Where does it lie? The mind lie, as we initially started talking about. Mind essentially, the brain is the seat of mind. So mind is a very abstract concept. But to make it very concrete in our day-to-day life, to make it thinking in terms of more operational terms, mind has got three functions broadly. They call it cognition or higher level of thinking, the emotions, which are essential, our feelings, and also our cognition or behavioral part. So if you think of it, a man thinks, a man feels, and a man or woman, they behave. So these three functions constitute. Now, so the mental illness will be the problem of these three domains, the cognitions. Cognition is attention, concentration, memory, and also about thinking. Now in thinking we'll be having different kinds of thought-related disorders will be there. Schizophrenia is one of them. Obsessive compulsive disorders is one of them. So there are two differences, but just to name a few, these are all broadly the thought-related mental health element. Then like emotion-related element, we talk about anxiety disorder, we talk about panic situations, we talk about bipolar disorder, that's also mood disorder. Depression is also mood-related issues, emotion-related issues, and so on and so forth. So basically, emotion-related disorders are the group of disorders, thought-related disorders, a group of disorders, and also behavior-related disorders. Everything, they're interconnected, because when thinking changes, it influences our feeling and it influences our behavior. So they are all interconnected, but primarily, some primary problems, they are reflected in the other domains. So essentially mental illnesses are, it has to be severe enough, number one. Number two, severe enough to what extent that the person cannot take care of himself or he becomes harmful to self or becomes dangerous for others. So to that extent, that is one part. Other part is usually in our technical, the reference part we'll see that it has to have some kind of a reference of standard text, either government approved or international standards. So I see someone, I say, look, this fellow seems to be having some mental illness. It doesn't work. It won't do. You have to say, with what criteria you have been saying this? Which international standard, like International Classification of Disease or Diagnostic or Statistical Manual or any government approved any other things, you have to refer to them. So you just cannot say somebody. So it's essentially, the point is, anybody and everybody having some kind of deviations in behavior, you cannot stamp them. You can guess, but you cannot stamp them as having mental illness. So it's a very, very important thing to understand while talking about mental illness and stamping someone, because that might, again, will be promoting stigmatization. Mental retardation is replaced by intellectual disability, a condition of arrested or incomplete. We know that intellectual disability is a form of disability. The intellectual developmental disorder today is called mental retardation, has been shifted to intellectual developmental disorder. That's a separate issue altogether. Disability, I'll quickly say a few things about disability. Disability is what the ailment does to the functioning part. So disability, person with disability means a person with long-term physical, mental, intellectual or sensory impairment, which in interactions with barriers hinders person's full and effective participation in the society that is equal with others. It has got three dimensions. Impairment in a person's body structure or function or mental functioning. Say, intellectually disabled person or maybe a mentally disabled person. What does that mean? A dementia person, think of a dementia person is losing his memory. So, memory impairment is causing some amount of disability in that person. So what will happen if the person loses memory? He or she will be unable to, for memorization, to solve a problem, he has to relate to the arithmetic or the complex problem related. So what will be the activity limitations will be there out of this disability, the impairment of functions. So you cannot solve problems. So that is other dimension. And if he cannot solve problem, then perhaps his place in the society as a very functional individual also will be limited. So social participation in productive engagement of work, that person will be having limited scope now. So obviously, these three dimensions, when you talk about disability, we think about the dimension that is also applicable to mental health issues. And in our mental health domain, there are few illnesses or disorders. That is, today the list of disabilities are about 27, if I remember correctly. But amongst, or 21, and amongst them, mental illness is one of them, and intellectual disability, autism spectrum disorder, cerebral palsy, specific learning disorder, speech and language disability, these are all categorized as disabilities. The implication of this is that the government also is providing certificates for those who are having this disability. That will be beneficial for them to having these certificates in different spheres of their life, from job to getting special kind of facilities and different spheres of their life. So, and this provision of certificates are from specific organizations are there, so that is government specified. So to talk about disability necessarily means that there will be some kind of gradation of this 40% disability, 30% disability, 20% disability, there is a percentage of disability, and according to that they are entitled to have some facilities in different domains of government related spaces. Now, what constitutes a mental illness? It's written in a greater detail. I just mentioned about it, that it has to be referred to some kind of standard definitions. The purpose of diagnosis is also very important. You cannot diagnose it for whatever purpose you think it out to be. You have to be keeping the interest of the person in mind before you diagnose the person. And what is that interest? That interest will be the treatment of mental illness. That is about, you have to keep that in mind, or in other matters that covered under this act or any other law for the time being in force. So basically, the interest of the person has to be kept in mind before you diagnose. You cannot diagnose this for whatever reason you can think of. Mental illness of a person shall not be determined on the basis of political, economic or social status or membership of a cultural, racial. So these are all excluding criteria. When you diagnose it on the just basis of the mental health problem, not the basis of, because at different times of history and different countries, they have utilized or abused, in fact, in their favor, the diagnosis of mental health and put them behind bars or put them incarceration, etc. So for this history of abuse of the definition of mental health was one of the issues that was kept in mind while formulating the definition of mental illness. So non-conformity with moral, social, cultural work or political values or religious beliefs prevailing in a person's community. So if a person does not believe in a particular political belief, that should not be made a criteria of a person having mental illness. Now, I might be having treatment before. That doesn't mean my current mental state has to have anything to do with my past mental health. So that is also part of mental illness. Historically, I had been some history of being ill. That does not mean that today also, that history part, that could be clinical history relevant for doctors who will be treating me. That will give him some direction. But that cannot be utilized to understand my current capacity of mind. We'll talk about the capacity. So, though relevant, shall not be by itself justify any person or future determination of the person's mental illness. The determination of person's mental illness shall alone not imply or to be taken to mean that the person is unsound mind unless he has been declared as such by a competent court. So, I had history, so this fellow had a history, and so now he is also having some kind of problem, mental health issues. No, that is not done. Now I'll talk about a little about the capacity, which perhaps will be, a little more relevant in everybody's situations. Those who will be working even in the judiciary. What is capacity? Capacity is very important determinant to take a few decisions about, because we'll talk about admissions of a person, voluntary and involuntary, or in today's term, independent or supported admissions. Every person, including a person with mental illness, shall be deemed to have capacity to make decisions regarding his mental health care or treatment if such person has the ability to understand the information, it can process that information inside his brain and see how the decision will be having its consequences, and he is able to communicate that decision. So there's an input system, that is the informations, there's a processing inside the brain, how he processes, and then there is an output system, how he will communicate it. So these are the three systems to understand the information whether he's been understanding the information that is given to him, and it has to be given in the plain simple language that is again encoded in this Mental Health Care Act. So this is understanding the information, appreciating means processing the information and see the foreseeable consequences of it, and then communicating this information to appropriate authority. So this is about, this information referred to in subsection 1 just before shall be given in a person using simple language which such person understanding in sign language or visually. So basically the information that this person is having, that has to be simple enough. Say me as a doctor, I am giving a person, mentally ill person, some information. So to test that capacity, I cannot say that I gave him in a very complex information, in a very complex way, in a language that he does not understand. So that is not the way how we will see the capacity of a person. So the person who is testing the capacity of another person, this first person has to give the information in a very simple language or in sign language which is understandable. So obviously I cannot inform or cannot give the information and say only a Bengali understanding person in English language. So that is one part of it. Also in a very complex way, in the same language but in a very complex way. So that is not valid. Whether a person makes a decision regarding his mental health care or treatment is perceived by others as inappropriate. This is another thing. Say the other person takes a decision. Say I think his decision he should take medication. But after listening to everything, he said no, I am not going to. So for me it seems like this person doesn't know, doesn't understand, he's taking a wrong decision. But that does not mean that this person doesn't have a capacity. As long as he has got capacity, the processing, whether he's taking a right decision and wrong decision, that's about him, that's about his care. So taking, as far as the doctor's concerned or somebody else's think that it is right decision and wrong decision, that does not make any difference. So right and wrong does not actually, as perceived by the primary person, should not be taken into account. Now, a person needs to be treated in the community. That we'll talk about a little later when they talk about rights of mentally ill person. Usually, in today's Mental Health Care Act, a person needs to be treated closest to his comfortable surrounding as much as possible. Maybe in the home that he belongs to and the community in general. But there are situations when admissions into a mental health establishment may be necessary. As I said, because of the unmanageability of the situation, maybe the family may not be in a position to take the charge, or the person may be harmful, so we'll see the criteria. So independent person or an independent admission, as I said, the voluntary and involuntary admission today, those terms are gone, they are obsolete. Today, the voluntary admission is replaced with independent admission. Means against the right-based word. A person is independent. Right? So, independent admission refers to the admission of a person with mental illness to a mental health care establishment who has the capacity to make mental health care and treatment decisions or requires minimal support in making decisions. Very simple. So, I have the capacity, so I'll decide. I know what capacity is. I can get information, simple language, I can process information, I can see the consequences, and according to me, I take the decision not to get admitted. So that, or to get admitted. So, independent admission means that I decided to take the admission with minimal support. Means doctor said, look, this is the things will happen. The mental health establishment says this is the things we'll do, we'll take care of you in a certain way. So those are the support, decision-making supports. All admissions in the mental health establishment as far as possible be independent admission. Now this is also part of the narrative of Mental Health Care Act, that as far as possible, one has to see that independent decisions are making. So rarely involuntary admissions or supported admissions are recommended. So in In independent admission, in section 86, so I am ill, I feel I need to get admitted, I have my own experience or understanding. So I go to the doctor, go to the mental health establishment. The medical officer and mental health professional. Mental health professional means a psychiatrist or even a psychologist. They evaluate me, my condition, and they can decide whether the person needs admission. And so, with mutual one's consent and others' decision, they get admitted. That's a very simple thing. What happens with the minor, below 18? Admission request by, we'll talk about nominated representative, a person who can take. In most of the cases, is the parents or the guardians, family members. They are the nominated representative. So they decide, take the person to a mental health establishment, and so there they decided the decision of admission is taken by 2 psychiatrists or 1 medical officer and a psychiatrist, or a mental health professional and a psychiatrist. So specifications are there, which combination of 2 persons in a case of minor will be deciding whether the person can be admitted or not. Intimation to the concerned board with 72 hours for women and children and 7 days. So if someone is admitted under this section, the mental health review board are there. So the mental health establishment is under mental health review board. So mental health review board needs to be informed about this particular information, that this person has been admitted. For children and for women, within 72 hours, the board has to be informed. But for male, adult male, they can stretch it up to 7 days. So now come to supported admission. Section 89, admission up to 30 days. There are 2 parts of it. One is up to 30 days and then beyond 30 days. There are 2 different sections for that, because it reflects some kind of complexity of the mental illness, the severity of the mental illness, and so on and so forth, whether repetitive admissions has to be taking place, etc. So there are 2 sections for this. One is admission up to 30 days and another is more severe cases, more than 30 days. What is the criterion for supported or so-called involuntary admissions? A little difficult. So there are some criteria has to be fulfilled, because involuntary, some kind of the voluntary part or the independent decision making part, because it's being threatened, a little crack is there. So some criteria, specific criteria has been made. So essentially, the person has to be harmful to self, or he has to be harmful to others, or in such a bad state that he cannot take care of himself. That's a very simple thing. Either harmful to self, harmful to others, or is not in a position to take care of self. That's simple. So these are the 3 criteria one has to fulfill. If a person with mental illness admitted under section 89 requires continuous admission more than 30 days, then section 90 will be applicable. So requires admission within 7 days of discharge under section 89. So 30 days is gone, discharge and come back again. The NR should give an application. There is a particular form which is available in the mental health establishment that has to be, the nominated representative has to fill up that form. MOs will continue the admission and request for 2 psychiatrists to evaluate independently. So independent evaluation for readmission. So that is again a check that you cannot indefinitely put a person inside. So the whole idea of the Mental Health Care Act is right now looking at the point of the person who has been afflicted with mental illness. As much as possible, you keep him in the or her in the community, close to the home, and lesser amount of staying in the mental health establishment, in the mental health care facility. That is not really very much appreciated. So MOs will continue to admission request for 2 psychiatrists independently. They have to evaluate and then take the decision. So essentially this is about voluntary or involuntary admission. Now I'll stop here, and a few essential things. We thought that few understanding about mental illness, mental health care, the biological underpinnings of them, how historically they have been evolved, shifting from societal needs to individual needs. So individual human rights, so the human rights is gradually making its space clearer and clearer. So in a confrontation between individual and society, now there is a whole shift of focus, the importance is given. They might be having some difficulties, but the societal control over an individual is about to fade gradually. An individual is becoming the prominent member who can decide about himself, irrespective of the societal, coming out of the societal control as much as possible. That is all about universal human rights approach. So under this construct, mental health care also Care Act is also been done the preamble. Through the preamble, it's been very clear. And so the different definitions, different aspects, different treatment, different admissions, all those things are geared towards keeping these individuals' interest, individuals afflicted with mental health. So huge amount of respect, regard, autonomy, agency, that the individual will decide where he will stay, where he will decide treatment or no treatment. But that kind of approach is what is there in Mental Health Care Act. With this understanding, now if you have some questions related to anything about, you can talk about anxiety, depression as well. There is nothing. This is an awareness program. Basically, we are talking about mental health and illness. Act is only a kind of superficial things that we are projecting to you, but you don't have to be limiting yourself to only Mental Health Care Act. You can talk about Mental Health Care Act, but from your own understanding about mental illness, you can share a few things as well. So it does not have to be a question. Your individual sharing also will be enriching us. So if someone could please.
तपाईहरुको कसैको नेपालीमा क्वेशन छ नि, नेपालीमा पनि भन्न सक्नुहुन्छ?
I would like to request learned participants to put forth your questions and queries, if any, please.
Would you please highlight such procedure or process which I can give suggestion to a mental disorder in a practical approach? Would you please?
Once more please, the question.
Would you please highlight such suggestion I can give to a mental disorder person, a practical suggestion, as in a home, if I found my sister in a depression, what would I suggest to her?
Okay, so obviously there are no approaches. You talk about practical approaches. Usually there are two kinds of approaches that is done. That's my own observation, and that maybe one can be helpful. One approach is the instructional approach, right? Your sister is junior to you and you are elder, so you think subtly, unknowingly you think that what we will say the other person should follow. because you are the elder, you are wiser, you have more knowledge. So the other person, so you instruct the person. It will hardly work. Instructions hardly work in our day-to-day life also. We ask them, there are people who will be following your instructions, maybe those who have faith dependent. But during making another person's a major decision, going to a doctor or not, with a whole lot of anxiety, because there is anxiety is about unknownness, what this doctor will ask, what this doctor will do, what the prescription medication will do to her brain. So many questions are there in her mind. Without eliciting the responses, what possibly are there in her mind, why she does not take a decision going to the doctor? Does she know? Isn't she aware of the fact that under these circumstances I have an option of going to a doctor for help? Does she know these things? So there is a different layer of awareness could be there. Maybe she is aware that she can go to a person for help. Maybe she does not have this kind of awareness. So in that case, informing her may be of some help. But if the person knows that she can go to a psychologist for counseling, she can go to a doctor for medicines, and yet she is not going, then there must be some reason for that. So what we suggest is from instructional approach to a more of a conversational approach. And what does that mean? Conversation means, dear sister, I find you, and then what you find in her, the consequences of mental illness you can focus on. Maybe there are three elements of consequences that we look for. One is that subjective level of suffering, how much that person is suffering from this. And being sister, you can always tell her, sister, I've been seeing that there is in your face I find sadness. In your face, in your behavior, I find worries. And yesterday when I was talking to you, I see that element of suffering kind of in different language, you can say that. So you can approach that point and you may wonder with a little bit of curiosity, you can ask her what's going on. That's one part. Other part is there will be work impairment. Whatever her occupation, she may not be able to study, she may not be going to, the qualitatively and quantitatively, the work will be hampered. There will be some amount of work impairment. And there will be some amount of social interaction impairment also. These are the three dimensions actually we look for. Not all mental illness needs addressing. I may be having some kind of sadness of mind, but all sadness of mind is not depressive syndrome diagnostically, because there are certain kind of, a syndrome of depression has to have 10-15 symptoms. Whereas I only can feel sad, it's nothing impacting. I do my work, I do my socialization, and yet I am not very happy about it. So, the sufferings part needs to be seen and highlighted. The impairment part has to be seen and highlighted. The social interaction part may be seen and highlighted. And you may wonder and ask sister, I find this in you. What's going on? I'm really curious to know that. So, I'd be happy if you feel free with me and we can talk about that, because I'm there for you. And then during those conversations, she may be a little more open to you and talk about it. And then I see that suffering is there. And then I have an idea, may I share that with you? And then you can say, look, I have this idea, I have this knowledge from this place, and this can be of some help. So you can tell me when you're ready, I can do some kind of an arrangement for that. So that kind of an approach is more of the decision comes from her. You only, from a decentered position, you only encourage her to talk about and to take the decision. So that's about how the decision. This is a very practical approach. Instruction hardly works. Does that answer to your question? Okay.
Good morning, sir. Sir, in the beginning you were talking about the cause in the molecular level. So you were talking about the brain cell, and in the cell we have the nucleus and chromosomes and the DNA. So, sir, I just wanted to know, like, are there any physical, environmental, or chemical factors that causes a change in this sequence of DNA?
See, there are two aspects of this. When we talk about genes, there is always a concern. No, it's a vertical transmission of genes from. It's a more of an inheritance. But if you look at the genes, have got two functions. So the vertical function is that when it expresses a criteria which is derived from the parents, the hierarchical parents. So that is the vertical part of gene. There is also a horizontal changes in genes functions, which are reflected in so many other things, amongst them as mental health, behavior and other things. Environmental interactions means how environment changes the genetic structure. The environment necessarily means that I experience something in the environment means I use all my sensory inputs. I see things through my visual sensation, then auditory sensations, and then so many other, touch, smell. All those sensations, they go inside. They go inside and they obviously, they go to specific cells and there are changes in the cells. What are the changes? The changes, the sensations, they create some kind of chemicals, the chemicals go to the receptor side, the receptor changes internal environment of the cell, and that necessarily means the nucleus and subnucleus and the molecular part, the genes, all those things, the chain of reactions takes place. And then comes the person's own memory and learning, then comes past experiences, the emotions related to this. So if you look at somebody, so many things I look at something, so many things are interacting immediately. Both the internal inputs and the external inputs, they work in a biological way. And they work in a cross-sectionally, some kind of, so the DNA and through RNA, a new protein is formed. A new protein is actually a new experience. So that's how cross-sectionally also we are undergoing chemical changes in the brains. Yesterday I was talking about substance use. So substance use also through injections. So I take it through injection and then it goes through the bloodstream, goes to the brain. So final destination is brain. And then these drugs go to a particular place, then another kind of reaction takes place, some neurotransmitters, chemicals are released. Those chemicals are attached to a particular area, another area of the brain, and then another chemicals is released, a new experience is there. So essentially, it's all those neurobiological changes are happening, and these changes are actually a very cascading effect on the final effect on the brain cells. So a particular area of the brain is impacted in a particular way, and some kind of new proteins are formed, and a new experience is experienced. So that's how it works, cross-sectional. Get some idea about how it works? No. Please be seated, you can hear you. Right?
Actually, I have two questions, sir. The first one is, suppose I'm a person having some mental illness.
Right.
Is it necessary for me to accept the treatment or refuse the treatment? Is it, has it got something related to informed consent? Can I refuse treatment? Suppose I'm mentally ill, have some mental ailment.
Right.
So, is it mandatory for me to take the treatment or can I refuse the treatment?
Oh, you can. You can, but there are three things. One thing is that to take the decision
Yes.
that I am not going to take the treatment. So to take the decision whether you are supposed to be in that state to take the decision. That is what capacity of taking a healthcare decision is all about. So what will happen is, if you silently suffer, not impacting anybody, then nobody will come to know. But if somebody comes to know that this person's behavior in a particular way, which is harmful for self, or it could turn out to be harmful for others, that has to be some documentary evidence that he has been harmful to others, or your day-to-day personal care is such that in any case that will be harmful. In that case, it will be decided that this person is not perhaps not in a position to take the decision for his healthcare need, because his capacity to take the decision is questionable. So what will happen is, obviously a person, you have to be brought to a psychiatrist, and ultimately there are so many ways of getting you to a police. A police can be informed, and it's the police's job. There is section 100, the police has got defined job to help the other persons, family members, to take you to a local mental health establishment, especially the government run hospital. So there doctors will be assessing you, and if you have a nominated representative before, then the nominated representative under this state can take a decision on behalf of you, because then the declaration, the nominated representative with that letter of yours can go, it has to be nominated representation or advance directives are signed by mental health board already. So with that signed certificate, they can approach the mental health establishment and say that this person has got this advance directive, I am the nominated representative, and please get him admitted. Then they will recheck you and assess you, and then they will decide whether these three criteria are fulfilled. Firstly, that you are not having capacity to take the decision, and then in current situation you may be harmful to yourself, you may be harmful to others, or you are grossly in a kind of state where you cannot take care of yourself. So under those sections you can be admitted. Otherwise you need not be afraid of getting admitted.
Yes, sir. The second question is, suppose a person is consuming alcohol, he is in an inebriated condition, so can he be labeled as a person with mental ailment?
Please once more.
Suppose a person has consumed alcohol.
Consumed alcohol,
yes,
okay.
He is not able to take his decision. His behavior is not so good. So can he be labeled as a person with mental ailment too? Because he is also not able to take decisions.
Right. Clinically, he can be diagnosed in a particular criteria of, say, international classification of disease. So first thing is, whether he is mentally ill or not, you have to be referring to a standard international criteria. Correct? Now, the picture as you have been painting about that person is that of a alcohol intoxication. Now, alcohol intoxication has got specific criteria mentioned in the book. So if you take him to a doctor, and if he finds that this person is having this criteria, then he can diagnose him as a person suffering from alcohol intoxication. But once the person is suffering alcohol intoxication, how long it lasts? Because it's been also mentioned, it does not last more than 4 to 8 hours. Right? So under that criteria, if a person is kept under observation, if a police picks him up, he can be kept in the police station without getting him more than 24 hours. A person can be kept in the police station with proper care. The police can inform him about if he is found on the roadside, how the person, where he is found, until unless he stays back at home, and who is going to take care that he is having a mental illness or not. But mental illness, alcohol intoxication by definition is a mentally altered state. So that can be defined. But it does not have much of a consequence. So simply, it may be labeled as, okay, you are intoxicated with alcohol. And intoxication with alcohol has got a ICD-9 criteria, under this, you are having alcohol intoxication. So, mental illness, yes, it's a part of the mental illness, but it does not have much of a consequence, because 4 to 8 hours time, the intoxication will go. And it's not a permanent change in brain, in any case. So brain cells are jarred up with the alcohol inside, and the brain cells will come back to its usual state in 4 to 8 hours time. So in any case, you don't need much of an intervention until unless you have done certain kind of flaw. You are dangerously driving with alcohol interaction. Then only you will be caught, because you are putting other persons into danger. So your intoxication is harmful for others. So under that criteria, it can be, you will be liable to some kind of a prosecution. But that's not about mental illness. They can take you down to a mental health care establishment, police, but the doctor will diagnose you as intoxication, will keep you sitting there for about 4 to 8 hours maximum, or will inform your guardian to take you back home, ask him to take rest and not to go for alcohol driving. So that's about managing the situation. You get that point?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
So my question is, how do we know if a person is having an anxiety or a depression?
Okay, that's a good question because again, we talk about anxiety, we talk about depression days in, days out. Always I'm anxious, I'm depressed. No. Does that constitute an ailment? Does it constitute a mental illness? So I think here the question of mental illness, how it is defined. Now having anxiety is not akin to having mental illness. Having depression is not having akin to. We have our blues, we call that blues. We go through mood changes every few days. 2 days, 3 days we remain sad, but then we come out of it. So depression and anxiety, they are diagnosed according to the criteria, as I said. Now, for depression to be diagnosed for the first time, one has to be in a state of depression for 15 days. Minimum 2 weeks of suffering has to be there. And then there are a host of symptoms will have to be there. Not only that my mood is low and depressed, but also there are a few criteria like I have to be lacking in energy, lacking in enthusiasm, lacking in motivation, having suicidal ideas, I'll be feeling helpless, I'll be feeling worthless, I'll be feeling I need a whole lot of crying spells in between. So that anhedonia, which means that the sense of pleasure is lost. Nothing interests me, nothing pleases me. Any news that would have been otherwise happy news for me, I don't respond to that happily anymore. And then there will be biological symptoms like sleep disturbances or oversleeping. There will be appetite disturbances or overeating. There will be libidinal disturbances like normal sexual drive that will be lost. There will be constipation. So all those symptoms, most of these symptoms taken together, there are also criteria, the 5 out of 7 symptoms, 10 out of, that the numbers are there. So one has to really fulfill the criteria of depression, and that has to last for over 15 days. But as I said, any mental illness, the broad understanding is that there will be an element of subjective level of suffering, or people around there also be suffering, and there will also be some kind of impairment in personal care, hygiene and other things, and also the social interactions. So work impairment, personal suffering, social interactions, and so these are the basic 3. If you don't have problem in these areas, then perhaps you are not having a mental illness. Anxiety is likewise. Anxiety disorders, and anxiety has 2 different things. Anxiety disorders will be again a whole lot of cluster of symptoms, like maybe that I am worrying with practically disproportionately over certain things. Like my mother is coming back late. So it's 8 o'clock and I'm running pacing up and down. Why is not coming? Why is not getting a call? So the moment, maybe you were expecting it coming at around 7 o'clock. Anything can happen on the road. But people don't really care, the normal people. But here the anxious person will be worrying unnecessarily. Having an exam in France, so disproportionate anxiety making him dysfunctional almost, that he cannot do day-to-day work and etc. So anxiety also means that palpitation. Anxiety also means will be thumping heart. Anxiety also means a chest pain. Anxiety also means cold, clammy extremities. Anxiety also means giddiness, Anxiety also means a kind of panic attacks at times when I'll be feeling like I'll die at any moment in time. So the heart will be so much thumping, the tongue will be so much dry, the abdominal discomfort will be there, and so multiple symptoms will be there to make me having a very crippling kind of an experience over a period of time. And obviously that will be having these three basic elements of subjective level of suffering, the work impairment, and that will also put me away from my social interactions day to day. So essentially you have to look for not only anxiety but so many other symptoms, and they are making you suffer to an extent that you cannot take it anymore, or your work is being impaired, and so then it becomes a particular concern for, and that needs addressing.
Good morning, sir. How accurate are these diagnoses, sir? For example, if tomorrow a psychologist or not psychologist, psychiatrist diagnoses him as someone with depression,
Right.
and prescribes medicines and all.
Right.
Later on, it turns out that he was actually not depressed, but only maybe overexcited or not so excited. So, in that case, what would be the, how do you...
Depression along with agitation, as I said, no, you talk about something, some forefront, what you call clinical observation, say agitation, right? But then we have to go deeper and we have to really get down to the, how do we diagnose? A person comes with a complaint, we take note of that. And then, say maybe three, four complaints he has. And then we try to elaborate on that. Basically try to explore further what are the things that possibly, I look at the person, the kind of complaints he makes, and then I elaborate on this from how long he's been having those problems, getting into more detail, and then try to elicit all other symptoms which could possibly be associated with it. Then we make note of them. So history taking is a part of thing. And then we go for mental status examination. We ask them few things. Mental status examination is a very structured interview schedule. We make a note of that. And then we go for particular maybe investigation at times. If we are not sure that this person is having a particular disorder, which we call psychodiagnostic evaluation. Psychodiagnostic evaluation, what is it? It's about sending a person to a psychologist to go for detailed examination, like in having, I see yellow discoloration in your eye, and I find it probably it's jaundice. What do? I ask you to go for an investigation. Go for see and see the bilirubin level, and I call it, okay, now it's crossed 1 or 1.2, so it's jaundice, or even if 6, 7 unit, then I call you are surely having jaundice. So I have some clinical impression on you, and then I go for appropriate diagnostic evaluation. Likewise in psychiatry also, mental health also, we take history, we do clinical examination, like mental state examination. We come to a few possibilities, and then we go for specifics of it, like if necessary. We rarely need that, but we go for that also, that when we are in a confusion, I'm not sure whether it is depression or whether there is a psychotic element is there, we go for further detail. They will be doing that in a very more structured and questionnaire based way, and they will give us feedback, probably this person is having this. So agitation the person can come with, but whether he will be diagnosed at all as depression or something else, that will be decided by further clinical, even the family inputs also will be taken. We very much appreciate, if we are not sure, maybe family members' observation also we take that into account, and that's a part of the history. Also we take note of the past historical events, whatever has happened. The family history part we take. If there is a family history of some kind of a problem, whether that is fitting into this person's initial problems. So whole lot of things needs to be worked out. It's not about just somebody comes with agitation and we diagnose. No, it doesn't work that way.
And doctor, what is the stage when the person should actually be prescribed medicines? we have noticed that the moment a person goes to a psychiatrist, they are immediately given some medicines. Now, is it, there has to be some stage when maybe he could,
Each
mere
diagnosis,
counseling could suffice in some cases.
right. We do get some kind of, especially the parental concerns, they take the children out there and they say, this fellow is not studying, and whether that particular behavior is a normal deviance, a deviance from normal, or it falls into the category of mental illness, that's the onus lies on the psychiatrist or the mental health professional, in this case the psychologist also would be. So, how to diagnose a person and when to take medication. In the diagnostic criteria, all the diagnoses, like anxiety, like depression, like any other things, they have something called a qualitative term called mild part, moderate part, severe part. Usually what can be done if it's a mild kind of problem, many times one can avoid giving medication. It's a mild problem. Work impairment not so much. Maybe he is going every day, not really liking the job, but nevertheless doing the job. So that part of there. Subjective suffering is there, but still he can manage. So if there is a mild thing, and if you see there is a distinctive stressor that in a few days' time is going to go over, like the examination and other things, then you can choose not to give him medication, but you need to discuss with the person that my expectation is within a few days' time, if you can survive this time, then possibilities are there, you don't have to take medication. So if the person agrees, if he says, no, doctor, I cannot manage myself, I really need to take some medication, so please help me. So you give him medication. So that's between the discussion between the doctor and the person, and jointly they can take a decision.
My last question. At times I see a connection between the moon and the mood of a person who has some mental issues. Is there any connection, sir? When the moon is bright, the person may not be that bright. But when there is no moon, or the night is overcast, or this thing, some behavioral changes are seen. What is the connection between lunar and all this?
Then suddenly, just a few days ago, incidentally, even in some European journal, I was just observing, even in 2023, some lunar cycles and mental health problems, some studies, review articles are there. Not much has been established about this, but actually it is being observed in the clinic. It has become a part of clinical study, that there is some observation. To what extent we give credence to this kind of an observation. So some studies are, but no conclusive inferences could be made out of this. So we don't know, but this observation could be possible for some people. We don't know the reason.
Now, what was the reason why the word lunacy came into existence in the year 1912? Was it at that time there were some studies where there was a correlation or a link established between the effect of the moon, I don't know whether it's full moon or new moon or whatever, with a mental health situation of an individual. Was there any kind of study during the medieval or later studies like 19th century? Why would otherwise be the word lunacy attached to the mental health?
Lunar cycle perhaps was the reason, because the lunacy term, when it was explained, it came into being. The simple observation was that there was not much of a scientific way of looking at things, but there was observation. This is more of a empirical kind of observation, and empirics also was a science, dominant science study was there. So seeing the person and making some observation out of them, there was a way of looking at them. But then changes in the water content, changes in the 5 elements in the body, and they have been associated with some kind of changes in the body and mind, and attributing those changes to mental health and illness also was a part of understanding of how mental health. But historically, the way today's science is approaching any particular problem, that correlation between lunar cycle and mental health issues is so peripheral that cause and effect relationship can hardly be established. So that is today's understanding. So there might be some cases, some observations could be made. Some individuals can be having some fluctuations of mood related with this, but to make it a dominant kind of cause-effect relationship over a population study, that could not be made.
Are there being any studies being carried out right now?
No, this European study that I was referring to, they tried very small kind of a sample, 17 or 19 persons they were studying, but nothing really came out of that. Again, as I said, that only not very significant. In statistical term, you have to find that the correlation has to be significant, but there is not much significance was found. Though some people they could find was having the fluctuations of mood related with the lunar cycles.
Is there any common symptoms among mentally ill persons?
Sir, is there any common symptoms or signs among mentally ill persons?
All mentally ill persons.
Some common symptoms.
Oh, very common symptoms. I think most commonly observed diagnostic categories, as our director sir was just mentioning, given statistics, depression is still the commonest disorder of all disorders found, the medical disorders found in human being, just after cardiac issues, cardiac ischemia. And the toll of depression, so depression being the second most common disease. Anxiety and depression taken together, and depression is supposed to be projected to be up to 2050 the topmost commonly occurring disorder in human being in general. So depression will be at the top of even before cardiac disease. So depression is the common thing is depression. Depression is of different types. Depression is a very repetitive depression or recurrent depression, major depressive disorders, and anxiety depressive disorders, where the anxiety and depressive symptoms are there. There is bipolar depression, which is different from major depressive disorders, which is in person is having serial depressive disorders, recurrent. That is major depression. But if a person is having one episode of manic phase, which is means hyper phase, rather than the down phase that is usually part of depressive disorder. Depression is about down, energy down, interest down, everything is down. The person is quiet. But is in opposite, in bipolar illness, there is another state called manic or hypomanic state, when a person is more flamboyant, more talkative, more confident, more expansive in mood. The more and more is being spending, outgoing, and that kind of stuff, very energetic. So that hyper phase is what defines bipolar illness. If a person has got a single episode of hyper phase, then he is a bipolar person. But so bipolar person, after having one or few hyper phase, also is prone to depression. And many times depressions are more in bipolar depression in terms of frequency. So common disorders are anxiety disorders, major depressive disorders, bipolar disorders, schizophrenia. So these are the 4-5 disorders, and also the dementia and substance use also is a very common problem. It's also part of mental health problem. So these are the few common things. But as our director sir was mentioning, there will be eating disorders, there will be some kind of what do you call eating disorder of different types. Peripheral disorders, maybe Autism and attention deficit disorders, they are most frequent disorder in child and adolescent psychiatry. So there are neurodevelopmental disorders. They are also not very infrequent in children. About 1 to 3% of all children, they might be having either attention deficit disorder, hyperactivity, or autism, that kind of stuff. So in child, adolescent, in adult, these are the common disorders. So depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, autism, these are all the common things. And also panic disorders, obsessive compulsive disorders. In different culture, obsessive compulsive disorder is very common disorder, where a person is very perfectionist, repetitively checks and rechecks things, and gets anxious very easily. And so that kind of problem is very underdiagnosed, but OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, is very much prevalent in the society. They suffer, but they somehow manage, most of them. In the mild cases, they hardly go for any kind of help-seeking behavior, is very much less with them. They think it's normal, mostly. So, obsessive compulsive disorder is also one.
Sir?
Yes.
May I ask you in Hindi, sir?
Oh yes, हाँ जी, आप बोलिए, हिंदी में बोलिए.
सर, ये स्ट्रेस, एंग्जाइटी,
जी,
डिप्रेशन,
जी,
और नर्वसनेस, सर, ये डेली लाइफ में हम लोग फेस करते हैं, सर.
जी.
इससे बचा कैसे जाए, सर? जैसे ऑफिस में प्रेशर है, घर में प्रेशर, लॉट ऑफ प्रेशर, सर. तो इसको अपनी पर्सनल लाइफ में घुसने से पहले इसको कैसे रोका जा सकता है? व्हाट आर द स्टेप्स और जो सर तरीके हैं, एक्सरसाइज या कुछ ऐसा चीज जिसको हम लोग इसको रोक सकते हैं, सर, ताकि डिप्रेशन ना आए, एंग्जाइटी ना आए?
देखिए, बात ऐसा है कि हर रोज के जो स्ट्रेस के लिए जिस तरह का हम लोग को एंग्जाइटी और लो मूड, डिप्रेशन जो होते हैं, वो ज़्यादा परसिस्ट नहीं कर पाते हैं. एंड वो मेजर पॉइंट जो मैंने पहले ही बताया आप लोगों को, कि कौन चीज़ के लिए ध्यान रखना है कि मेरे सब्जेक्टिव सफरिंग्स जो है वो उसके ऊपर ध्यान देना है, कितना सफरिंग्स मुझे आ रहा है, और मेरे वर्क पर कितने इन्फ्लुएंस इस तरह का स्ट्रेस और एंजाइटी वो फैला रहा है, और मेरा सोशल इंटरैक्शंस इस तरफ से, मेरी तरफ से कितना रिस्ट्रिक्टेड होने जा रहा है. ये सारे जो कॉन्सिक्वेंस होते हैं प्रॉब्लम की, तो प्रॉब्लम इज नॉट द इशू, द प्रॉब्लम इज कॉन्सिक्वेंसेस आर द इशू. जैसे कि मेरे एंजाइटी के लिए जो जो चीज हो रहा है, जो कॉन्सिक्वेंस जो हो रहा है, उसके ऊपर पहले देखना है कि मुझे पार्ट ऑफ लाइफ वन हैज टू एक्सेप्ट दैट द नॉर्मल एंजाइटी, और जो हर किसी को कभी ना कभी एक स्टेज ऑफ लाइफ में जाना पड़ता है. सो देयर विल बी अ स्टेजेस एंड फेजेस ऑफ लाइफ व्हिच विल बी इन्वॉल्विंग एंजाइटी एंड स्ट्रेस. सो दैट पार्ट ऑफ मेंटल सेट दैट आई ऑलवेज नीड टू बी हैप्पी, इस तरह का एक जो सोच दिमाग में रखा जाता है, ये जरूरी नहीं है कि द नॉर्मल ह्यूमन बीइंग हैज टू गो थ्रू ऑल काइंड्स ऑफ एक्सपीरियंसेस. द सफरिंग्स इज एन इंटीग्रल पार्ट ऑफ ह्यूमन एग्जिस्टेंस. So, though we keep trying to be happy all the time, but we have to be really also alert the general possibility that there will be phases, and this is not permanent kind. There will be an element of ups and downs, and if they are manageable, then I don't have to worry too much about it. Accepting the fact that I have to be worried when the exam comes, there will be worries, and the exam will go, the worries will go. That will be one part of suffering, will be there. I'll be having some kind of sleep loss when I'll be having my mother ill. So that illness will be causing me enormous amount of tension and suffering. So one has to be ready with this kind of sufferings, which will be a part of my anxiety and low mood and depression. That's a part of thing. Other thing is that if there is persistent enough that is impacting my day-to-day life, my subjective suffering, my work impairment, and then social so I'm getting gradually withdrawn over a period of time and having impacting my appetite, my biological dysfunction is taking place. So in that case, that will be a clinical part. So how to avoid those things? First thing is understanding that a few things will keep happening. And despite that, I need to do a few things. What are those that can help me to get on top of this kind of anxiety and low mood? Is that has been seen that a bit of physical exercise every day, that helps. Any form, simplest of it I suggest is walking, because you don't need to have very much paraphernalia of going for a walk. Otherwise, if those who can afford to play games, they can go for playing games, they can go to gymnasiums, but mostly gymnasiums, what helps is aerobic form of exercise, because in aerobics form of exercise where a lot of oxygen needs to be taken, say maybe playing badminton, playing tennis, going for all those walking and other things, what happens is you take a lot of oxygens, and these aerobic forms of exercise, they liberate some kind of endogenous morphine in our brain, which are called endorphins. So morphine-like substances are released. These endogenous morphine, a particular type is beta endorphin, that causes release of dopamine in the another part of the brain. And this dopamine release gives us feeling of relaxations and joy of mind. So immediately after exercise, you might see a change in your whole general level of energy and approach and level of satisfaction and feeling of reward. So exercise every day can be integrated into your lifestyle. Yoga and meditation also help, because today's world we know the impact of especially something called mindfulness meditation. In mindfulness meditation, there has been shown that anxiety disorder is a part of overactivity of a part of our autonomic nervous system, which is called sympathetic nervous system. In sympathetic nervous system, under duress, they causes lot of adrenaline and noradrenaline release that increases our heart rate, that increases sweating and other things. So many symptoms of anxiety is actually the expression of overactivity of sympathetic nervous system. So what the opposite nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system stimulation can be done, then that will be taken care of this sympathetic overactivity. What is done is meditation, is that parasympathetic stimulation, the vagus nerve stimulation takes place, and this anxiety probability is becoming less and less. So different forms of meditations are there, especially mindfulness meditation, they are very helpful. So what we see is that exercise, different forms of yoga, and then taking lots of water, and maybe relaxing a bit if you can afford to take good relaxation, social interactions. These are all very helpful measures to alleviate the impact of day-to-day stress, so that you can think of.
Thank you, sir.
So 2 more queries, sir. Some people, when we look at them, they look depressive. So is it true that when your facial features, I'm not talking about other non-verbal cues, on the face of it, what is apparent to you, they look very depressive. So is it true that they might be actually depressive, so that we can deal with them in a special manner?
I think, yeah, that's a very perceptive approach to dealing with people, those who possibly could be suffering. I think this kind of perception really helps. Being perceptive means being sensitive to the external features. We look at the face. Face is a part of mental system, that's a part of our observation. Because face reflects so many things. And the body movement also. So when we clinically assess, not only the history we elicit, but also in mental state we see the way the posture, whether the body movement, whether the facial expressions, sad, morose faced, reflecting poor personal health, personal care, those kind of hint we get. But then that is not by which we actually diagnose a person. We get the hint of a sadness in the mouth, in the face, but we get that hint and then we try to elaborate. that we take the hint out of it. And then we look for depressive other features. We look for how much he's been enjoying over these past 7 days. What are the mostly thoughts in his mind? How he's been going through? How was the day like? How was the week like? What are the other features? How's the appetite like? How's the sleep like? What did he do over these last 7 days time? How enjoyable these 7 days are? Or what is his basic interest? His hobbies and other things. During these 7 days, whether he felt like indulging in those hobbies and interests. So, if you try to elicit other features of depression, then this facial expression is in alignment with these other elicited features, then perhaps we'll be yes calling depression. But to begin with, that gives some ideas in which line we should explore. So that way is very perceptive. And if you look for somebody having a kind of sad faces, and if it strikes you, then maybe in an indirect way, you can try to, and if the person is friendly with you, you can try to explore how's life generally, how things are going on, and whether this particular thing that he's been thinking about of late keeping him preoccupied. Those kind of stuffs, starting very superficial and then going a little deeper and deeper. So that will be helpful.
Last one from my side, last one, sir.
That's fine.
So, is there a correlation between biological changes in the body and your mental health? For example, someone going through menopause, she or he, maybe in some cases, would have some impact in our mental health, sir?
Very much, very much. There are diagnostic criteria also. Especially there are different phases of menstruations are mentioned, and the particular phase, which is called luteal phase depression, is very clinical entity. So previously it used to be called premenstrual teenage. So biological changes means hormonal changes in the body, especially a few changes. The menarche, the initiation of puberty, then the end of puberty, end of the productive age, reproductive age group. So all those features are associated with a severe degree of hormonal changes in the body. So yes, they are seen to be very much clinically also very important in their life, and especially women are more prone to anxiety and depression during this phase. Especially postpartum phase, also post-delivery also, they are more vulnerable. So there is also another set of biological changes happening in women. So women and mental health, specific time periods, they are also very special areas of interest. So that needs to be looked. So during pregnancy, post during labor pain, then having the baby born, the mental health issues of the woman are very vulnerable around these periods.
Hello, good afternoon, sir. So my question to you is, how do you pursue a person with a mental disorder, or for that matter, with anxiety disorder or depression, who is in total denial to get a clinical intervention? Because I see a lot of people does not come out because of the social criticism they get, so they are in complete denial.
So you sense that the person must be having, going through some kind of anxiety and depression which needs clinical evaluation.
Right.
We had been discussing all these issues. Essentially, I'll be reiterating a few things that firstly, you need to establish a rapport. You have to really influence him or her with your decision-making process. Firstly, you need to develop a rapport with that person. That person trusts you, that person relates to you, think that you are helpful at least. So that kind of, without establishing that kind of relation, simply meeting somebody on the roadside and asking him to go to a psychiatrist, that's not going to do. This kind of an approach is not going to help. So how do you do that? We've been discussing this. usually we tend to ask them, look, I think you are depressed, so you better go to a psychiatrist. That kind of an approach. It hardly works. It's more of what you call, your intention could be good, but the other person may not be agreeable to that. Usually the decision-making process, better it comes from within the person who has been suffering. So the motivation has to be generated within that person. So our job is not to tell him or her, do this or don't do this. Our job is to create that space within that individual where he or she can take their own life's decision. Now that's a process, that's not a very kind of cross-sectional intervention mode, which is essentially done by instructing. So to do that, needing that establishment of relationship between the other person who you want to really go to a psychiatrist or change his mind or her mind, it has to be some kind of conversation has to take place between you and the person. And your conversation maybe can start from a little bit of curiosity that what you find, why do you think that the person is depressed? So you must be having your observation, right? And so obviously people won't be very much ready to talk about their internal feelings. What happens in communication is, there are so many levels of communication, from superficial to deeper. A good communication helps person to bridge the gap between these two. And how that happens? There is a kind of called cliché communication. I say hi, good morning, goodbye, and that doesn't mean that when I ask you, how are you, I'm not really asking for the latest medical reports of you. It's more of saying, hi, I recognize you. So how are you necessarily means, I recognize you, so you go your way, I go my way. It's said hi kind. This is called very cliché communication, so I address you. The next step is factual communication. When I share facts, maybe what time of the day today, I ask you and you tell me, no, it's 10 o'clock kind of stuff. So that's a factual communication. Then comes intellectual communication, where like a teacher and student in the class, they discuss about things over a period of time. That's intellectual communication. Next comes the emotional level of communication. In emotional communication, people really establish certain kind of rapport with you, which is very rare. It's a deeper communication, it's a rare kind of communication. So to talk about anxiety and depression and other very personal level, one has to get the rapport to that emotional level of communication. So if I meet someone suddenly on the road, that kind of communication is very difficult to establish. So I have to meet that person, be friends with that person. That's a kind of long-term commitment with the person to change. Or else I need to be known to that person that this fellow knows a lot about this mental state and he is saying something means I value his or her comment too much. In that case, you don't have to have rapport, because it's coming from my physics teacher that no, you do something about it. Because I obey him, I do that. It's simply that obedience also have a history of communication. So you cannot ignore that. My point is to influence somebody to take decision about his mental health care. One has to be, the person with good intent has to have some kind of rapport establishment, and this rapport has to be more at an emotional level where the person is suddenly depend on your wisdom of guidance. So it's not a very cross-sectional, sudden kind of instructional approach. It might develop over a period of time, and one has to be on the basis of whatever relations you have, you need certain kind of conversation. You might talk to her what you find in her. That keeps you worried, that I'm worried because I find these things in you. For that also you need to know a little bit about her, so that she comes out with a little bit more information, that she cannot sleep over the last 7 days time, that she's not eating well, and she's crying most of the time. All these things once is shared. This is a very personal sharing. This doesn't come automatically. So you need to be patient to change the decision making process of ours. So that's a process.
Sir, I have two questions. The First one is mental illness. Let's talk about common illness like anxiety and depression, because we have heard that there is the medicines are prescribed for a course of time. Is it curable? And if the person's after the course is over, just like other ailments, if you see there are certain ailments of heart, of other organs for which the medicines are prescribed for a lifetime, person like blood pressures, etc. So is mental illness of this nature, where the person will have to take the medicine for a lifetime, or it can be cured in the middle? My second question, just like there are certain, yesterday also the session talked about the substance abusers who also get affected to certain extent with mental illness. But my experience has shown, we have state jail out here. We have a lot of case on substance abusers, mostly the drugs plasmoproxil and nitrosin 10. And once the arrest is made, they are put into the jail. Now in jail,
just a second please, plasmoproxil and
nitrosin 10.
Nitrosin 10.
So after arrest, usually bail is very much difficult in these cases. For at least 3 months, they would stay. That too, if the charge sheet comes, then they would be staying for longer than 3 months. But we have not seen any reports coming from there that there is a certain change of behavior in these substance abusers who has been housed there, despite their dependence on the substance being cutting off. So does the environment where one gets to feel that once I'm housed here, I will not get this substance anymore, does that change his behavior? And because we have had no reports that there are quite a lot of inmates of this category, and we have not had any reports that they have suddenly acted differently because of the cutoff from the substance in the jail. So would there be something on this?
Okay, right. So I've got two questions, very important. They require a little lengthy answer. Firstly, that how long, if the treatment is started, how long is treated, whether all the time they're lifelong. So think of any disorder, anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, whatever. Most of the disorders, psychiatric disorders, are they're chronic relapsing kind of a disorder. So what does that mean? That it's more like diabetes, hypertension, most of the time. Most of the time, as I said, because there are situations when a person might be having 1 episode, 2 episodes in their life, and they're fine for the rest of their life. So that is there. But by and large, when you talk about mental health and illness, we think in the model of chronic relapsing disorder comparable with rheumatoid arthritis, diabetes, hypertension, bronchial asthma. These are all called chronic relapsing disorders. So in most of the cases, there could be a possibility of lifelong treatment. But it's not necessary that everyone you come across for the first time will be prescribing for the rest of the life. There are some rule of thumbs. If we see a person, say maybe for the first time having a problem, relatively at the latter part of life, maybe in their 30s, 40s, first episode, no family history, then we'll see that the prognosis of this person, then the onset of depression is happening with a particular stressor in life. So if we see there are few prognostic factors, as we call them, that decides the progression or the course of the illness, we take care of all these things. So first episodes, 30-year-old female comes with the breakup of relationship, or somebody is passed away or failed in an examination or lost mother, whoever, some kind of stressor, financial loss, prestige loss, whatever. So we assess them and we think that medication should be helpful, then we go for medication. But we also take care that these medications initially as given for first episode means the treatment will be there for 6 to 9 months. That's the rule of thumb. The treatment response occurs within 2 to 3 weeks of time. There will be complete recovery, by and large, most of the persons will be by 4 months' time complete recovery. But in our clinical experience, we see that extends from 3 months to 6 months. And then another 3 months, you continue with that medication in a particular dose. And then you mutually agree, you talk to that person that this is my plan, what do you think? The person says, look, the kind of sufferings I had to go through, I don't want to take any chance. I would rather continue with this medication. They would react, but that they can choose. But they are also from our side that we usually do is first episode. You don't have any family history, and this is the particular kind of stressor that you had. So there is a huge probability that you won't be suffering anymore. But then this person for the first episode comes after trying a very dangerous kind of self-harming episode. Like she maybe tried to commit suicide in a very jumping from a roof, say, possibly, somehow saved. So if the person says with that, even if it's single episode, but if the part of the symptom was suicidal ideas, not only that attempt, so severe, then we can also discuss that particular issue. Look, we don't know, it might again happen, and if this happens, you might not get a chance second time. So what will be your idea? Do you want to continue with this medication, or you want to take another chance? My sense is, I can offer my sense is it may not be worthwhile to take any chance because you had this severity of depression. But it can, because the person now is coming out of the illness, capacity to take decision is there. Whether it could be right and wrong, according to me, it should not be changing the decision. You get that point? So I establish rapport with her, I can try to influence, I can influence her decision, but I cannot take her decision. That's the approach. So first episode is like, second episode is go for 2 years after second episode. Third episode, we continue for 5 years. Fourth episode, we suggest that you go for lifelong. Now, most of the time in reality, they go for treatment, they come back. There is non-adherence to treatment protocol, they come back with again full-blown depressive episode or whatever. So that's how it goes. So answering to your question, whether each time you go for lifelong, no, it's not. For every psychiatric disorder, first episode, quite a few prognostic factors are there. We evaluate them and then we suggest to them that, look, this is the scientific study, this is our rule of thumbs, and now this is I'm sharing with you, you take your call, or if the person is a minor, maybe discuss with the parents, and then we take a joint decision. And then we keep our numbers, whenever you find any problem, initiation of the problem with relapse symptoms will be like this. The moment you start relapsing, within initial few 7 days period, you can contact me and you can come over. So before it gets severe, you can always intervene in a much earlier stage. So that kind of approach is appropriate and that is usually done. So that answers your first question, right? The second question is, spermoproximone and nitrazone in the recovery center, they are there, and suddenly you find them showing some bizarre behavior following discontinuation of these substances. Is it? They do not? Please have a little more clarification.
Not actually the recovery center, I am talking about the jail where they are housed during the period of investigation and trial. Even after being cut off from that substance, they have not shown that, there is no report, they may have shown, I am not sure about that, but no such reports the courts have received that they have shown weird behavior despite being cut off from this substance. So what could this be, or it's non-reporting?
So many things can happen. The behavior is an expression of internal changes. So behavior must be associated with some kind of thinking disturbances, some kind of emotional disturbances, a combination of both. You need to explore that part. with the kind of medication that you are talking about, opiates and nitrogen, if they are suddenly withdrawn, for nitrogen it will be complicated withdrawal symptoms. That would be a confusional state, which is reflected in a little bit of disorientation, irrelevant talk, hallucinatory behavior, running around, those kind of behavioral aberrations you can see as a withdrawal symptoms, because you have suddenly cut off that substance from him without taking care of the withdrawal management. Even in spasmoproxivon, which is essentially an opiate, partial opiate antagonist, we can say it's more like opium related substance. So what you get, that heroin kind of an withdrawal symptoms will be having in that person after some time, within 72 hours, 48 to 72 hours. So during that withdrawal symptoms, there may be a lot of sleep disturbance and other things. Maybe there are incipient psychological problems, there will be some family issues, family psychiatric problems are there. So could be a genetic loading. What primarily prompted this person to take substances, there might be so many reasons for that. Maybe some psychiatric disorders had already been there. Maybe depression may lead them to taking substances. So we don't know about the prior history of these substances, but the post-stopping behavioral disturbances is mostly related with withdrawal symptoms. And other things could be that because it causes stress, so many things are happening around. Suddenly some new psychiatric episode may be in some vulnerable or historically, genetically predisposed person. That can also be a part of the possibility. So we need to really discuss a little more about the historical part of the patient that we have been talking about. But instant thinking is like that, have we taken care of the withdrawal symptoms? That's to begin with. Because both of them are strong withdrawal potential. So, and without taking care of that, they are not supposed to be put in some kind of even home environment, suddenly cut. So withdrawal management is a critical part of their management, and I think a sensitive system should focus on that also. They could be violating some norms, but they will be having their mental health rights in place, that treatment accessibility, treatment facility should be there, available to them.
Yes, sir, because why I put up this question is, as a magistrate, I used to visit the jail, and the inmates who are arrested in cases relating to NDPS, and we have a local law called Sikkim Anti-Drugs Act, they are housed in a different cell, apart from the persons who are undergoing trial for other offences. So what difference I used to notice was, though because there, when we go, we used to ask them, do you have any problems? Every cell would have some kind of problem. They would say that some of the we are not getting soaps in time, or we have not been provided proper beds, etc. These were the things which we used to look into. The replies that used to come, the inmates housed in the inmates who were housed in a particular cell for substance abuse, they would also have the same problem, but their expression differed from the ones who were in the other cells. The way of expressing it, they seemed more agitated. Okay. So this could be, I believe, because I don't think there is a withdrawal management system in our jail at present. Because once in one program, I had been to TR jail, where even after the person is released from the jail, in these cases, there was a system of withdrawal management. Right. So as per my understanding goes, as what Sir said now, I think withdrawal management is very important.
Very key issues, especially both of them will be having very strong withdrawal symptoms. Both nitrogen, which is akin to alcohol, and they might end up having convulsions. I only talked about confusional state for nitrogen, but nitrogen sudden discontinuation. I remember a very young patient of mine had suddenly from confusional state, because the number of tablets he sort of told me, it was much less than what actually he was taking. He used to take 60-70 tablets of 10 milligram nitrazepam. He was just 28, 29 years old. So on the second day, suddenly while I was talking to him, I found him talking a little irrelevant. Then somehow I took a special care. I added a little more, took care of the withdrawal a little more, but it wasn't adequate. Actually, within next 10-15 hours, he started having multiple convulsions, which is called status epilepticus, which is a life-threatening disorder. And I remember switching him to a very close by general hospital having ICU facilities. That was very early part in my career, I remember. So nitrogen tablet, when they take it in good numbers, 10, 20, 30, 40. So until unless you can have real numbers, they will always come out with less than what you have been saying. The part of the denial mechanism is that they always try to, if you ask an alcoholic how much, occasionally I take, then gradually come to know. So I start asking question, how much you take? 3 bottles a day? Then they laugh at it. Well, no, are you a mad doctor? So he said, I take only 1 bottle a day. Otherwise, you'll find that he'll be saying 1 peg or 2 pegs a day. So you start off with a very high range of asking him, do you take 50 tablets a day of 10 milligram tablets? They'll say, okay, a little less, 30, 40. So how you ask the question, it's a special kind of approach that you have to make to them. They won't come out with the truth right away. They'll always try to minimize the truth.
Yes, Doctor. We have 2 more questions from.
You have dealt all the issues from the beginning. It was a very enlightenment for us. Since there are 2 challenges still we lived. One is that stigmatization, that people wants to go, if someone go to the psychiatric, he is a psychiatric patient, like that. And if someone goes to the psychological conversation or interactions, they have been treated differently. So how you suggest to cope up all these issues, or that non-stigmatization of these issues in the society, and how you will see this as a challenges in the modern new families?
So yeah, that's a real life question that influencing them to meet a psychiatrist or mad doctor who is madness. So those kind of approach is still there. It's a part of the kind of stigma that we are really very deeply steeped in. Stigma is not only is a part of our culture. Stigma is across the world. Stigma is, even in American society, stigma is there. So one way of addressing this stigma is repetitive awareness program and showing the improvement, discussing about how people's lives can be changed with treatment and without treatment, what happens with them. So we talk of, say, suicide and depression. Almost 70% of all suicides, they are a consequence of persons suffering silently from depression. Most of the time they don't know that the help is there. The availability of help, that it's a disorder, they don't know. The suffering, they take it as a part of the sufferings, and this world is not suitable for them, and it's not worth living in this state, and so they die. There is nothing called mental health illness, operations, or there is nothing called psychiatry, psychology. Simply they don't know that this is a depressive disorder which can be treated, which can be taken care of by certain socially kind of employed people called psychiatrists, psychologists, etc. So simple lack of awareness is first step. So raising the awareness, talking more and more about anxiety and depression and their treatability and etc. Number 2 is more and more of is seen to be a part of weakness. The depression is an expression of a weak person. You are a weak person. Why don't you be a stronger person? So that's kind of an approach. So it's very much culturally embedded understanding of what depression is all about. Depression is a weakness. So my son is having depression, my daughter is having depression. I tell them, be strong. Look at me, how do I manage? In your days, I used to have more sufferings than you. You are a privileged boy, you are a privileged girl. Why you should be suffering? So stand up, come with me. We'll go for a jog, kind of stuff. And the fellow cannot really leave the bed because so much drained of energy, so much lack of enthusiasm. So the whole approach, the understanding has to be changing to help them to see a doctor. First step is being more and more aware and then talking more and more about it. And then looking at it from a biological perspective, that is like another person having a physical disorder. So essentially, if you look at it, psychiatric disorder has nothing to, all mental disorders are actually physical disorders. The mind and body, the separation is actually very artificial separation. Brain is a part of the body. Mental dysfunctions are part of brain cells dysfunction. So where is the mind? We don't know where mind is. So it's just a name because it's a tradition of separating mind with the body. But otherwise, everything mental is a biological expression of the brain cells at molecular level. We have been talking about it since morning. So, in case of someone is having problem in the tummy, say diarrhea, we ask him to take depression tablets. Somebody is having depression, we ask him, we don't ask the diarrhea person to make your tummy stronger so you don't have to go to the toilet repeatedly. We don't tell them. Somehow we accept them that somehow tummy's problem is beyond this person's control. If you look at the concept of disease or disorder, the singular criteria of a disease is that it has to be beyond control of somebody, that particular person. Any symptom of a disease has to be beyond the personal control of that individual. That's the basic understanding about disease. So diarrhea means, if it's a disease, then the symptom of diarrhea, repetitively going to the toilet, if that is the symptom, that going repetitively to the toilet is beyond this person's control. So we ask the person to take medication, he takes medication. But when it comes to depression, the depression has to be under the control of that individual. That's my basic concept. So there is a conceptual error that depression is also disease of the brain. So this is another level of understanding that like diarrhea, depression is also a treatable illness. How is treatable? Because diarrhea is a biological dysfunction of the tummy. Depression is a biological dysfunction of the brain. So if diarrhea has to be treated, depression also needs treatment. That's simple. In mild kind of a diarrhea, you may or may not be taking tablets. You may do something, you take rest, you take dietary readjustment, and it may be self-limiting. In all kinds of viral fever, you don't take medications. So likewise, in all forms of depression, you don't have to take medication. It could be mild and it could be self-remitting. So those kind of understanding, a detailed understanding is required to hit this stigma at its bottom. But there is a huge lack between this knowledge that needs to be known and needs to be percolated in the society and the knowledge that we have at this point in time. The societal knowledge that needs to be the gap between the accumulated knowledge and the societal knowledge. The gap is so vast. And herein comes perhaps the role of the professionals like us to bridge the gaps, and maybe some other authorities to bridge the gap between these two persons, where the information can be flowed from the resources to where it needs to be flown in. But again, if you look at the whole data, then we have hardly maybe few thousand doctors, the professionals in this world. And if they are all reach out on they come out on the roads and start talking about mental health awareness, even hardly that will be reaching out to this kind of 140 crores of people. So there's a huge gap in resources and other things, but your question is well taken, that how this stigma can be broken. The stigma addressal is the more and more scientific knowledge has to be flown from the original resources, whatever they are, to the public, to the common man. Those are many times they are very sensitive. It's not that people don't understand, but the language we choose to communicate is very important. Very, as you said, no, it's in Mental Health Care Act. The communication is very important. It has to be simple in the language that the other person understands that. That's very essential for the human rights to be uplifted. So human rights also requires a lot of information to be made available to them, so that they can take some informed decision. That how this information is to be spread, that is the issue. So before one takes a decision, we cannot blame the person who is failing to take a decision, whether it be treated. Then informed decision means that information has to be reached to that person. There is a huge gap between the source of knowledge and between the knowledge those who has to be transmitted in. So how this gap can be bridged, that you need to think about. Yes.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
सर मुझे बस यही आपसे ये जानना चाहता था कि आर यू जस्ट टॉकिंग अबाउट विड्रॉल, और सर एक्चुअली ये विड्रॉल के फिर बाद में सर ऐसा ये मैंने सुना है सर, ये पोस्ट एक्यूट विड्रॉल सिम्टम, ये शॉर्टकट में पोस्ट ऐसे बोलता है सर, तो उसको कैसे हम आइडेंटिफाई करें? हाउ कैन आई जस्ट आइडेंटिफाई दैट आई जस्ट फेस दैट पोस्ट इज विथ मी सर?
Oh, so I think you raised that again a very clinically relevant point, that there is some acute phase of withdrawal and there is something called protracted withdrawal. If you could please explain this to the gentleman. Acute withdrawal means that you stop taking that drug, maybe opiate, or maybe some tablets, plasmaproxine, opiate-related drugs, or nitrogen like some. So you stop taking that medication immediately, hourly basis, immediate some withdrawal will be there. Some will be within 72 hours, some will be lengthened up to 72. But a few symptoms will be remaining for about 6 months up to 1 year, especially in opiate withdrawal. Weakness is a part of that. Sleep disturbances is a part of that. Irritability is a part of that. So that's a very subtle things. And periodic craving also could be a part of that. That's why the relapse takes place within 1 year so much. So one has to really be aware of these protracted withdrawal symptoms. That is very much found in opiate withdrawal cases. As you said कि अब और भी कुछ दिन तक रह जाता है, so that could be due to this protracted withdrawal. Not only weakness, but also sleep disturbance also could be a part. Irritability also could be a part in psychological function. So yes, आप जो प्रश्न पूछे हैं वो उसमें दम है. It's very real.
So my question to you again. I understand that all the mental disorder or depression advances within time if left untreated. So what happens if it's left untreated? Because like Sir said, because lack of awareness and sensitization, people tend to think that it can be cured, say, if we do yoga or meditation. So how if Sir could enlighten us about this
All right.
issue.
I understand. Again, as I said, many time, what you've been talking about, the spontaneous remission of a particular, say, depression or anxiety over a period of time, spontaneously, if you leave it untreated, what happens to them? That is called the natural history of a particular disorder. You leave them alone. A substantial majority do recover spontaneously, especially in depression, not in psychosis, schizophrenia or other things, but in depression, we hardly find a person, especially in childhood and adolescent depression, we hardly find a person having a depressive episode lasting for more than 2 years. That's been rarely recorded. So yes, usually what happens is, most of the depression are mild form of depressions, those who naturally gets remitted over a period of time. But the percentage of this spontaneous remission is not much. It's maybe 20%, 25%. But even if some people, we don't know who will be spontaneously remitting. Maybe the probability of someone having spontaneously remitting is if they are stress related, if there is no family history, and they occur at the latter part of the age, right, with some kind of stressor. So you can follow them. The problem is that what complicates the situation is this depression, if you leave untreated, that will be causing functional impairment of that particular person. Now in today's world, a person with 60% functional ability, he or she cannot survive. Think of a family where everyone is expecting a class 8 student of doing good result because he is a good student. Now suddenly out of depression, continuous depression, this person starts falling, grades are falling. Obviously, the teachers will be alarmed, the parents will be accusing, they'll be pushing forward, but this fellow doesn't know what's going on. He just simply cannot focus, cannot concentrate, doesn't get that motivation. What will happen is, not only the person will be allowed to stay, but he'll be pushed so hard, and he'll be trying so hard, and he cannot manage, then there will be a whole lot of confidence will be even worsened, and that will go spirally downward. The more confidence is dented, the person will be feeling hopeless, and lesser amount of, again, the energy and motivation can be put onto the studies. So leaving the person untreated will be having its own consequence, because the disease process may not be having its own natural history. So many other person will be putting in their contribution to make the situation complicated for that fellow. So if you look at the very real life situation, nobody is left alone in this world. The parents will be there making some comments. The students also making will be fun. The teachers also will be again demanding something has to be done with this. The fellow cannot live all by himself. So he'll be put under pressure, having losing confidence, he'll be putting less and less worsen, and then something will happen. You never know what will happen.
So like my mother, she's been taking depression medicine for the past 5 years. And she has a continuous recurrent depression experience. So does she has to take throughout her lifetime the medicine, or can she come out of it? So what do you suggest?
See, we really take into account our whole life situations. The kind of medication for depression are really safe, and they don't have much kind of side effects, or pretty much they are good medications are available. The new medications are having lesser and lesser side effects. So we have a whole baskets of choices in choosing a particular medication that will be very effective. So at one end there is a suffering without medication. At the other end, there's a choice with medication, the suffering will be taken care of. Now we put these two situations in front of her. What will be the choice? In this case, many times, maybe she'll be looking up to you and say, whatever you say, I'll do that. Maybe your influence will be there on her decision. In that case, you have to decide on behalf of her. So seeing my mother getting into depressive episode repeatedly and suffering, others are taking a tablet or 2 tablets. You have to really see that the sleeping pills we don't really ask them to continue, because sleeping pills will be having its own consequences, negative consequences. Sleeping pill does not have much to do with depression alleviation over a period of time, so there will be pure antidepressant tablets. And pure antidepressant tablets, if she is on to prevent recurrence of depression, perhaps that will be a fair choice, because there is a history of recurrent depression. Once she is taken out of so her history says that she needs medication. So if the choice is suffering from depression without medication and no suffering from medication with no suffering from depression with medication, ask her to get a balance of it.
Hello. So, like for example, the person suffering from this like opioid depression, like they feel like very hard to, take up that habit. So, like the molecules may bind to the cell receptor. So, like in modern science, are there any other like chemically synthesized molecules that is like similar shape that might bind to the cell receptor and help them in like easily withdrawing that?
Can you please a little louder and slower, please?
So, like for example, this opioid drugs, so they might have a molecule.
Opioid drugs?
Yes, and they might bind to the cell receptor
molecule.
So, is there any chemically synthesized molecule that is similar to that shape that might bind to the cell receptor and help them like easily, help them in easy withdrawal of the drug?
Oh yes, you got it right. So what happens is that we called harm reduction method of treating a substance use disorder, especially in opioids. So we need to find a kind of substitution of this particular opioid, so maybe heroin, morphine, pethidine, what she's been having. We need to find out a drug that will be working on the similar receptor site, and the lesser amount of impairment in different aspects of life will be less. So in that case, the harm will be less, and that is we call substitution program. One such molecule is methadone substitution, and another is buprenorphine, which is called for maintenance treatment. Methadone is not in our country, it's not available. Methadone substitution program has been very clearly, it's been very much in vogue in United States, but somehow it's not being available. But buprenorphine, it's a scheduled drug again, but one has to be, so you get it from very limited sources. Some people are licensed to keep these medications. So if you think of it, that the buprenorphine and naloxone combinations are available, so you substitute opioid withdrawal, say with buprenorphine, and then once the substitution part is taken care of, you add naloxone to that, you make that use of buprenorphine and naloxone combination, and that's how many persons usage of that medication, the dose varies from 4 milligram, there's a 4 milligram point 1 milligram combination or 2 milligram point 0.5 milligram combinations are there, but total about 16 to 24 milligram buprenorphine over a 24 hours time you can use in a single dose, because there are half-lives and longer. So that's the utility, and you have less of dysfunctions with this kind of a replacement. That's been there. Though there are few other aspects also to be discussed, but generally this is at a biological level. This is the biological underpinning or understanding about substitution management of opioid.
Doctor, is it a myth or a fact that taking antidepressants alters the chemical structure of your brain forever? And if it is true that the person can never, the mental capacity of the person, it's never quite the same as he was before taking those antidepressants. Is it true, doctor?
See, technically, we don't find much biologically demonstrable changes in the brain after someone starts taking antidepressant. Demonstrable in the sense that there is not much of a gross change. If somebody is an intelligent person taking antidepressant, after getting antidepressant the person becomes less intelligent, or the score of intelligence getting lesser. We don't have that kind of. You talk about capacity, so intellectual capacity is less. We don't find that as a documentary evidence for using antidepressant over a period of time. But just a couple of days ago, I was sharing with my senior, another psychiatrist, that some people do report that after stopping those medication, initially they took the medication for quite some time and then they discontinued medication. And somehow they feel that with medication, somehow something was amiss with them. Now this is not to talk about much of intellectual capacity or something. So that's a very subjective sharing that we come across many a time. Not many people talk about that, but those who are very sensitive and perceptive about themselves, they feel something was amiss about them while on antidepressant. And so we keep it at that. These are all very sporadic reports. There's not much any objective data related to some kind of intellectual loss following antidepressant treatment. Nothing of that sort. So don't have to be very scared about those understanding. No, nothing documented.
We have come to the end of today's program. Now I would like to invite Mr. Adarsh Kharer to propose the vote of thanks.
Good afternoon, esteemed dignitaries gathered in this auditorium. First and foremost, I, on behalf of Sikkim Judicial Academy, would like to express my sincere gratitude to Honorable Mr. Justice Vishwanath Sumadar, Chief Justice High Court of Sikkim and Patron-in-Chief, Sikkim Judicial Academy, for sharing precious time out of His Lordship's busy schedule to honor us with his esteemed presence. Your Lordship's presence has elevated the significance of this program to great heights. Equally, I would like to extend our deepest appreciation to our learned resource person, Dr. Satyajit, for sharing his valuable experience, knowledge, and insights with us. We are deeply honored and privileged to have him guide us on the crucial topic of mental health. His deliberation was truly inspiring and thought-provoking, and I am confident that it will have a lasting impact on all of us. Furthermore, I would like to express my gratitude to the Learned Registrar General, Learned Registrar Judicial Service, Learned Central Project Coordinator, Additional Registrar cum PPS to Honorable the Chief Justice, Joint Registrar IT, and the officers and staff of the Registry of the High Court and Sikkim Judicial Academy for attending this program. Your presence has added an extra layer of significance to this event, and we sincerely hope that you have found it enriching. I would also like to offer thanks to all those who work tirelessly behind the scenes to ensure the success of this event. Your unwavering dedication is truly commendable. On behalf of the Academy, I would like to extend a heartfelt thanks to everyone who has graced this occasion with their esteemed presence. Lastly, with the permission of Honorable the Chief Justice, I would like to bring today's session to a close. I would like to request Honorable the Chief Justice and all participants to kindly proceed to the banquet hall and lecture theatre to for lunch. Thank you.
Thank you.